On the other hand, if you make under $250, $000 a year like 98% of American families do, then your taxes shouldn't go up. That's the proposal. Now, you'll hear some people point out that the Buffett rule alone won't raise enough revenue. To solve our deficit problems. Maybe not, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. And I intend to keep fighting for this kind of balance and fairness until the other side starts listening. Because I believe this is what the American people want. I believe this is the best way to pay for the investments. We need to grow our economy and strengthen the middle class. And by the way, I believe it's the right thing to do. This larger debate that we will be having and that you will be covering in the coming year. About the size and role of government, this debate has been with us since our founding days. And during moments of great challenge and change, like the ones that we're living through now. The debate gets sharper, it gets more vigorous. That's a good thing. As a country that prizes both our individual freedom and our obligations to one another, this is one of the most important debates that we can have. But no matter what we argue or where we stand, we have always held certain beliefs as Americans. We believe that in order to preserve our own freedoms and pursue our own happiness, we can't just think about ourselves. We have to think about the country that made those liberties possible. We have to think about our fellow citizens with whom we share a community. We have to think about what's required to preserve the American dream for future generations. And this sense of responsibility to each other and our country, this isn't a partisan feeling. This isn't a Democratic or Republican idea. It's patriotism. And if we keep that in mind, and uphold our obligations to one another and to this larger enterprise that is America. Then I have no doubt that we will continue our long and prosperous journey as the greatest nation on earth. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. Thank you. Mr. Singleton, thank you, Mr. President. We appreciate so much you being with us today. I have some questions from the audience. Which I will ask, and I'll be more careful than I was last time I did this. Republicans have been sharply critical of your budget ideas as well. What can you say to the Americans who just want both sides? To stop fighting and get some work done on their behalf? The President, well, I completely understand the American people's frustrations. Because the truth is that these are eminently solvable problems. I know that Christine Lagarde is here from the IMF. And she's looking at the books of a lot of other countries around the world. The kinds of challenges they face fiscally are so much more severe than anything that we confront. If we make some sensible decisions. So the American people's impulses are absolutely right. These are solvable problems if people of good faith came together and were willing to compromise. The challenge we have right now is that we have on one side, a party that will brook no compromise. And this is not just my assertion. We had presidential candidates who stood on a stage and were asked, would you accept a budget package? A deficit reduction plan, that involved $10 of cuts for every dollar in revenue increases? A 10-to-1 ratio of spending cuts to revenue. Not one of them raised their hand. Think about that. Ronald Reagan, who, as I recall, is not accused of being a tax and spend socialist. Understood repeatedly that when the deficit started to get out of control, that for him to make a deal he would have to propose both. Spending cuts and tax increases. Did it multiple times. He could not get through a Republican primary today. So let's look at Bowles-Simpson. Essentially, my differences with Bowles-Simpson were I actually proposed less revenue and slightly lower defense spending cuts. The Republicans want to increase defense spending and take in no revenue, which makes it impossible to balance. The deficit under the terms that Bowles-Simpson laid out unless you essentially eliminate discretionary spending. You don't just cut discretionary spending. Everything we think of as being pretty important, from education to basic science and research to transportation spending to national parks to environmental protection, we'd essentially have to eliminate. I guess another way of thinking about this is, and this bears on your reporting. I think that there is oftentimes the impulse to suggest that if the two parties are disagreeing, then they're equally at fault and the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And an equivalence is presented which reinforces, I think, people's cynicism about Washington generally. This is not one of those situations where there's an equivalence. I've got some of the most liberal Democrats in Congress who were prepared to make significant changes. To entitlements that go against their political interests, and who said they were willing to do it. And we couldn't get a Republican to stand up and say, we'll raise some revenue. Or even to suggest that we won't give more tax cuts to people who don't need them. And so I think it's important to put the current debate in some historical context. It's not just true, by the way, of the budget. It's true of a lot of the debates that we're having out here. Cap and trade was originally proposed by conservatives and Republicans as a market-based solution. To solving environmental problems. The first president to talk about cap and trade was George H. W. Bush. Now you've got the other party essentially saying we shouldn't. Even be thinking about environmental protection, let's gut the EPA. Healthcare, which is in the news right now, there's a reason why there's a little bit of confusion in the Republican primary about healthcare and the individual mandate. Since it originated as a conservative idea to preserve the private marketplace in health. Care while still assuring that everybody got covered, in contrast to a single-payer plan. Now, suddenly, This is some socialist overreach. So as all of you are doing your reporting, I think it's important to remember that the positions I'm taking now on the budget and a host of other issues, if we had been having this discussion 20 years ago. Or even 15 years ago, would have been considered squarely centrist positions. What's changed is the center of the Republican Party. And that's certainly true with the budget. Mr. Singleton, Mr. President, the Managing Director of the Inaudible for continuation. Of United States Leadership Inaudible Economic Issues. And underscored the need for a lower deficit and lower debt. How can you respond to that claim? The President, well, look, she's absolutely right. It's interesting, when I travel around the world at these international fora, and I've said this before, the degree to which America is still the one indispensable nation, the degree to which even as other countries are rising and their economies are expanding, we are still looked to for leadership, for agenda setting, not just because of our size. Not just because of our military power, but because there is a sense that unlike most superpowers in the past, we try to set out a set of universal rules, a set of principles by which everybody can benefit. And that's true on the economic front as well. We continue to be the world's largest market, an important engine for economic growth. We can't return to a time when by simply borrowing and consuming, we end up driving global economic growth. I said this a few months after I was elected at the first G20 summit. I said the days when Americans using their credit cards and home equity loans finance the rest of the world's growth by taking in imports from every place else, those days are over. On the other hand, we continue to be an extraordinarily important market and foundation for global economic growth. We do have to take care of our deficits. I think Christine has spoken before, and I think most economists would argue as well. That the challenge when it comes to our deficits is not short-term discretionary spending, which is manageable. As I said before and I want to repeat, as a percentage of our GDP, our discretionary spending. All the things that the Republicans are proposing cutting. Is actually lower than it's been since Dwight Eisenhower. There has not been some massive expansion of social programs that help the poor. Environmental programs, education programs. That's not our problem. Our problem is that our revenue has dropped down to between 15 and 16%, far lower than it has been historically. Certainly far lower than it was under Ronald Reagan at the same. Time as our healthcare costs have surged, and our demographics mean that there is more and more pressure being placed on financing our Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security programs. So at a time when the recovery is still gaining steam, and unemployment is still very high, the solution should be pretty apparent. And that is even as we continue to make investments in growth today, for example. Putting some of our construction workers back to work rebuilding schools and roads and bridges. Or helping states to rehire teachers at a time when schools are having a huge difficulty retaining quality teachers in the classroom, all of which would benefit our economy. We focus on a long-term plan to stabilize our revenues at a responsible level and to deal with our healthcare programs in a responsible way. And that's exactly what I'm proposing.